I'm happy to be presenting this for the Maine Irish Heritage Center. The program was also broadcast earlier to St. Joseph's College, where I taught for 36 years. Today, what we're going to do is to look at the question of governance. In particular, we're going to look at the question of big city mayors versus the United States civil service system. Back in the 19th century, many cities, especially large cities, and in particular with large immigrant groups like the Irish, had very popular big city mayors. One of the most famous and long-lasting was James Michael Curley, the 5-time mayor of Boston. This program will look at Curley's career largely through the lens of John Ford and his film, The Last Hurrah. There'll be 3 snippets from that film looking at some of the life and adventures of James Michael Curley. In opposition to that, there'll be a little bit of discussion about the civil service system in America that started in the late 19th century and now is quite prevalent throughout the country, in which the idea of jobs earned by merit replaced the idea of jobs given to friends or allies, as was often the case with the big city mayors. So we'll watch this program. I hope you enjoy it. So to begin with, let's talk about patronage. Patronage is defined as the exchange of jobs, contracts, or other political favors in exchange for votes, campaign contributions, or even outright bribes. Now, surprise, surprise, that these things happen in American politics. They certainly happened in the 19th century, they happened in the 20th century, and heavens knows they're still going on today. The civil service was an attempt to, if not get rid of patronage, then at least to bring it under control. A system of rewards by merit as opposed to rewards by patronage, by who you know, or trying to get something in return. The famous expression goes, to the victor goes the spoils. And although that was talked about in the case of war, it also was true in politics. So today you might often hear the expression, elections have consequences. And we're seeing this already. The Joe Biden team is only in office 100 days, but you've already seen many appointments. One of the most recent appointments that was just made of Marty Walsh, the now former mayor of Boston. This picture, this image is of the most famous political boss of all time, William Boss Tweed, the leader of the Tammany Hall political movement in New York City. Boss Tweed lived in the 19th century. From 1858 on, he led the Democratic Party. He served several terms both as a representative and as a senator in New York, but his main power source was boards of overseers or various boards of directors, including banks and other very powerful institutions like energy companies. So through this, his political connections, he made lots of money, as you can see in the image in the center. But also, as often happens, people who make a lot of money sometimes misappropriate that money. We'll show 2 images of Tammany Hall from the outside and from the inside. So you can see from the opulence of that image that the money was pouring in and the people working there had lots to work with. So I think that, what I will say is Boss Tweed ended up in jail. He's not the first or last political leader to end up in jail, but in his case, he thought he had made a deal to get out of jail by providing testimony against some of his allies. He provided the testimony, but the governor of New York, Samuel Tilden, reneged on his promise. And so Boss Tweed in 1878 died in the Ludlow Street jail of severe pneumonia. So be careful of how you make your money. He wasn't, of course, the only big city mayor. You have Jimmy Walker, a famous mayor of New York in the 1920s and early 30s. You have a picture of Fiorello LaGuardia looking at a political appointment, or maybe even a member of the press. And I think he's giving him a thumbs up there, but I'm not sure. A couple of other famous big city mayors would be Big Bill Thompson of Chicago in the 1915 to 20 period, and then again in the late 20s to the early 30s, throwing out an early pitch probably to either the White Sox or the Cubs. And then an image of probably the most famous modern big city mayor, Richard Daley of Chicago, who served from 1955 to 1976. Now, other political bosses have been feted in both movies and books. One of the most famous movies, of course, were The Gangs of New York, which starred Daniel Day-Lewis, Leonardo DiCaprio, and also the film had a cameo appearance by Liam Neeson, but he played the role of a priest, but his role ended very abruptly in the movie when he was executed. The most famous film, I suppose, dealing with political shenanigans in Washington, D.C., and in particular, the question of the filibuster, it's been talked about a lot lately, is Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring Jimmy Stewart. And in this role, you see Jimmy Stewart trying to fight for his political survival against a very powerful political boss and the senator from his home state who does the boss's bidding in Washington. It's a classic movie, and anybody who studies political science should know this movie inside and out. This next image is from All the King's Men, which stars Broderick Crawford. So anybody old enough would know 2450 to Headquarters, Broderick Crawford playing the famous role of a police officer. But in this particular role, he played the role of Huey Long, the Kingfisher. Huey Long was the political leader in Louisiana. He served both as governor and as senator. And again, he was feted in the book and in the movie, both by the same name, All the King's Men. A couple of pictures of the true Huey Long. He was exultant. He was a demagogue. He knew how to hold a crowd. He was a showman. And there was hardly a speech that he gave that he didn't at least wow the audience, whether you agreed with what he said or not. Sometimes the people who fly too close to the sun come to a crash landing. So the Times-Picayune of New Orleans reports that Long is shot, and then you will see that the assassination attempt was actually successful. In 1935, just before he was politically thinking of running against FDR for president, he was killed by somebody who had been an ally of his, but was done wrong, let's put it that way. Okay, now to get on to the other part of the talk, the United States Civil Service Commission. The purpose of the Civil Service Commission was to select federal government employees to run multiple agencies based on merit rather than political patronage or the spoils system. So the idea behind this was, of course, that people could put friends into high political office. And when you see the snippets of film that we're going to use, you'll see examples of that. The commission wanted to put people into political and civil service jobs based on their ability. The next slide will show you 4 of the first presidents that were responsible for creating this system, starting with Ulysses Grant on the left, Rutherford B. Hayes, James A. Garfield, and then Chester Arthur, spanning all the way from the 1870s up through the 1880s. So these were the early people promoting this idea. The Pendleton Act in 1883 required the civil service exam of course, based on merit. The Hatch Act in 1939 prohibited political activity on the part of civil servants, again, to separate politics from the civil service. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 said that state and local agencies should also be based on the federal model. And going up to the 21st century, we have now, it's estimated, several hundreds of thousands of civil service workers, the vast majority of them, surprisingly, working outside of Washington, D.C. Roughly 84% of civil servants work outside of the Washington, D.C. area. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the example of the most famous big city mayor of all, James Michael Curley. Some of you might be more than familiar with him. If you're from Boston, you would know him. He has statues and other mementos to his memory. 5-time mayor of Boston. Vote often and early for James Michael Curley. And Tip O'Neill used to love to sing a song about Curley, and one of the lines was, when he was speaking, you could hear him all the way up in Biddeford, Maine, because he had a great speaking voice. John Ford was interested in Curley because John Ford was actually John Martin Feeney, and he was born of an Irish Catholic family in Cape Elizabeth and grew up on Munjoy Hill in Portland. The Curleys and the Kennedys had a close relationship. In the first slide, you'll see a picture of Honey Fitz, upper left-hand corner. That was John Fitzgerald, Honey Fitz, as he was called, the father of Rose Kennedy and the mother of the future president of the United States. Below that, you have a picture of Honey Fitz and also Joe Kennedy and JFK on the right. So you have, on the right-hand side, you have the 3 generations, Honey Fitz, his son-in-law, Joe Kennedy, and then Joe's son, John. John was not intended to be the president. His older brother, Joseph, was meant to be, but he died in a World War II aviation accident. This picture might seem out of context, and the sisters will recognize this image immediately as the first American saint, Mother Cabrini. And the question you might be asking me is, what on earth has Mother Cabrini got to do with the civil service or anything else that I'm talking about today? But you'll find out what Mother Cabrini has to do, and at the same time, you'll find out how Mayor James Michael Curley operated.
Maeve, honey, we got company.
How do you do, Mr. Uncle Frank? So nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Won't you come in?
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to see you again. Honey, let's get something to eat.
Do you know your mother was the prettiest girl who ever lived in the 3rd Ward? Except one. And that was her mother, Ellen, your grandmother. And do you know that you look exactly like her?
Do I really?
Indeed you do.
But my father says that you try to be all things to all people.
Oh, no. I try to be only one thing, their mayor. But of course, sometimes that requires a little juggling, you know. You know, the trick, Maeve, is to know what the people want, and then what you can settle for. You see, you can always promise the first, but you really only have to deliver the second.
But what if people want entirely opposite things? How can you satisfy everybody?
Then you depend upon man's greatest friend, the compromise. I can give you a case in point. Do you remember, Adam, the statue I promised for them down in the park at Little Italy?
Yeah, that was Christopher Columbus, wasn't it?
Well, yes, his name was mentioned, but that happened to be at a communion breakfast of the Knights of Columbus, you know. Now, the next day, the Sons of Italy got hold of me, and, of course, they plugged for Garibaldi. The following day, the athletic club called me, and they wanted Rocky Marciano. And then a band of enthusiasts got together, believe it or not, and suggested the Cardinal. Now, what would you do in a situation like that and still not make enemies? Now,
I don't know. What did you do?
well, I'm going to make my announcement tomorrow. Going to be the first act of the newly elected mayor. Mm-hmm. The statue is going to be of Mother Cabrini.
Mother Cabrini?
Italian-born, first American saint. Let's see somebody fool around with that one.
Now, here's a juxtaposition for you, but I hope I can make it make some sense. The next film clip that I'm going to use from The Last Hurrah deals with this man, Cotton Mather, one of the early leaders of the Puritans of early Boston. You see a depiction of the witch trials that happened famously in Salem, Massachusetts. And Cotton Mather and the Puritans, of course, had their own suspicions about the devil's work in this country and in individuals. The film clip that you're going to see next from The Last Hurrah deals with a visit that James Michael Curley, in the form of Frank Skeffington, played, of course, by one of the most famous actors in American history, Spencer Tracy, visiting the Plymouth Club, and in particular going upstairs to the Cotton Mather room. This is an incredibly humorous, well, it's an important scene, but just setting it up a little bit for you, you can be paying attention a little bit to two of the most famous actors in there. You'll, of course, see Spencer Tracy, but you'll also see a banker by the name of Mr. Norman Cass, played by Basil Rathbone. And you'll also see a newspaper editor by the name of Amos Force, played by John Carradine. There's also another important actor in here who plays the role of Bishop Gardner, in this case, an Episcopal bishop.
Mr. Skeffington, don't worry, it's not a hold-up.
All right, come on, beat it. But I beg your pardon, I'm a member here.
Remarkable. Still breathing the same air they brought over in the Mayflower.
Hello, Robert. I believe Mr. Norman Cass is having lunch here today with some of his friends.
Yes, sir, Mr. Winslow, in the Cotton Mather room.
The cotton. You're joking.
Honest to God.
What do they use for decorations up there, huh? Burning witches? Dunking stools?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Pick yourselves a nice, comfortable pillory, gentlemen. I'll be down presently.
Mr. Skeffington.
Gentlemen, I bring alarming news. The redcoats are coming.
Oh, but sir, you can't go up there. No person who is not a member may go beyond the first floor.
And I don't wonder. The place is obviously a fire trap. Look at those banisters. Just flimsy. And that door, is that a fire door? Don't you know that every fire door is required by law to be covered by metal? Inspector, make a note of that.
I will, sir.
Look at that.
Got a pencil on you?
Huh.
Settle the matter. You read my editorial this afternoon, you'll see that I...
Gentlemen, please forgive this intrusion, but I claim the privileges of House Rule 12. And I come on a matter fully as important as fire, floods, and Indian attack.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Mayor, you have never ceased to amaze me. Well, gentlemen, do we invite His Honor to join us in a cup of coffee? Or shall we just sit here in outraged dignity?
I, for one, refuse to sit at the same table with
Sit down. Since you admit it is an intrusion, Mr. Skeffington, what do you want?
Well, not coffee at any rate. Thank you very much, Bishop Gardner. What I want, very simply, is what your distinguished ancestors, the Pilgrim Fathers, wanted when they came to these shores 300 years ago. Better living conditions, specifically in Ward 9.
I call this confounded impudence.
Amos, please. You had your answer to that this morning.
Well, I came in the hope that you might change your mind.
Sorry.
Are you speaking for Consolidated only, Mr. Cass?
I believe I'm speaking for us all.
Indeed you are.
No reason to change.
Oh. Well, now that does pose a problem. I hate going to the press and reporting that the city's leading bankers are opposed to slum clearance.
You may report, sir, that the banks do not consider this city a good financial risk. Under your administration, we prefer to wait until the municipal situation has changed, at least to some extent.
To the extent of a new mayor, is that it?
Precisely. Now, if you'll have the goodness
I
to
can't
read...
say that I blame you entirely for wanting me out of office. But, gentlemen, please don't use this housing development as a political football. I tell you, there isn't a day goes by that some kid isn't run over down there playing in the street because he has no place else to play. And do you know how many cases of pneumonia we took out of those cold water flats last year alone? Would you have it on your conscience that because
Mr. Skeffington, before appealing to our conscience, I suggest that you consult your own. We have not jeopardized the city's credit.
There is nothing wrong with the city's credit, and you know it.
And that we happen to differ.
On that and one or two other points. But it really all boils down to one, doesn't it? The fact that the city is no longer yours, it's ours. You have this musty shrine to your blue-nosed ancestors, but my people have the city hall. And that's what sticks in your craw. You can't swallow it, you can't forget it. Well, I'm going to make you eat it. That housing project is going up as planned, and it's going to open on schedule. And you know what day that's going to be? St. Patrick's Day. And I'm going to lead the parade right down here past those windows to remind you of this promise I'm making now. And now, gentlemen, I'll bid you good day.
Mr. Mayor, aren't you being a bit too Irish? Certainly what you said may have been true once. The jealousy, the resentment we old-time Yankees had for your people when you first began crowding in. I'd say it was natural enough. But look at what's been happening. Our boys and girls are going to the same schools and colleges. They're intermarrying, raising families.
No child of mine will ever marry one of them.
That's not surprising, Amos, considering that you're a bachelor. There's just one thing more, Mr. Mayor. We Yankees have been termed hard and flinty. Our Puritan heritage, no doubt. But we love this city just as deeply as you more sentimental Irish claim to love it.
Claim to? You don't think that I honestly do?
Yes, I honestly think you do. You know, you haven't won entirely by the Irish vote. I've occasionally voted for you myself. I may again.
Thank you, Bishop.
Mr. Skeffington, in spite of the fact that you're the mayor of this city, you have no right...
A derby, wasn't it, Your Honor?
Yes. Whose is that, Sir Thomas Lipton? Didn't know he was a member. How did he get in?
Oh, no, Your Honor. That's Mr. Norman Cass Jr.'s, the Commodore.
Oh, of course, the Commodore, yeah. Yes, you remember the Commodore? Classmates.
If you must rub it in, yes.
Yeah. Take the Commodore's hat and find him.
He'd be in the bar.
Have him in my office.
But...
in an hour. I wonder if I could leave a little message with you for Mr. Cass Sr. Would you tell him that I shall expect him at the City Hall the first thing in the morning?
First thing, at the City Hall. Yes, Your Honor. I will, sir. And, Your Honor, don't let on, but...
You're a man after my own heart.
It's one of my very favorite films, even though it was not critically acclaimed. I love it. I love that line, especially when Amos Forrest gets up and says, "No child of mine will ever marry one of them," meaning an Irish Catholic. And the bishop reminds him that he's a bachelor. Okay, so James Michael Curley had books and movies and articles written about him. I mentioned this before. This was Joseph Dineen, The Purple Shamrock. That's Joe on the left, and a cover of his book. The Last Hurrah by Edwin O'Connor, from which the name of the movie comes, The Last Hurrah. Edwin O'Connor also did All in the Family. Again, another one of those memory names that will reverberate to people who watched that series, All in the Family, with Archie Bunker. And now I think we're going to see the last snippet. This is a brief one. And this little snippet goes to show how the opponents of Frank Skeffington, or James Michael Curley, tried to beat him at his own game by putting up an Irish Catholic to run against an Irish Catholic. And in this particular case, in the movie, they picked a bumbling idiot. And I think that you'll see this from the little snippet that you're going to see now of the interview, the television interview that was done in his home.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the coalition candidate for mayor, Kevin Mccluskey. Won't you sit down, Mr. Mccluskey? Now, tell me, Mr. Mccluskey, how do you feel the campaign has been going?
I feel fine. I honestly do. And it's my honest belief that it's been a wonderful campaign. And Jack, I honestly believe, speaking in all sincerity, that when people realize the issues of honest government, of honest government, that they will flock to the polls in great numbers.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Mccluskey.
Dear, mignon.
Mrs. Mccluskey. Mrs. Mccluskey. Well, Mrs. Mccluskey, I see you're being the dutiful wife.
Ah, Charlie, isn't that a darling picture of American home life? We'll win in a walk.
A posterior for posterity. I'll have one enlarged for your headquarters.
Get away with that thing.
Tell me, are you enjoying this campaign? Well, how does it feel to be the wife of the candidate for mayor?
Oh, it feels absolutely wonderful, Mr. Mangan. It makes me very proud of my husband. But then, I have always been proud of him.
And,
and of the children.
Yes. I understand they just came downstairs with you. Did you have any trouble with them, Mrs. Mccluskey?
Oh, no, except for Valerie. Valerie, I was just putting Valerie to bed, but nothing would do but that she come too.
Well, she's a wonderful little tyke. Oh, there they are. Come right in, children.
Come on, children. Come right in now. Valerie, come on. Come on, Valerie. That's a girl.
That's a cute little one there.
There you are. All right, now curtsy, girls.
Right. Oh, that's it. Go to Daddy. Ladies and gentlemen, the lovely family of Kevin Mccluskey, your next mayor.
Good night, Ernest. Good night, President.
Good night, Bishop.
Thank you, Graves. I was watching your man on television. The answer is no.
Perhaps you didn't understand my call. We're not asking for money, merely your endorsement of his candidacy.
That's right, Bishop. Just a simple statement from you as one of our most prominent churchmen.
No.
You mind telling me why?
I don't like him.
That's one of the funniest scenes in the whole film. This is a picture of Jack Beatty on the left, and he wrote the most definitive work on Mayor Curley, and he called it appropriately the Rascal King. And I wanted to just make mention of the fact that not just the Irish, but people of all races, ethnicities, religions, etc., have used politics to try to get a leg up in America. On the left, you have a picture of Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, and there's John Lewis with her. And on the right, you have a picture of Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., with former President Obama. Here you have a picture of, and I was going to say Boston's mayor, but when I made this slide, he was, but now he's the former mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh. Below, you have a picture of Marty Walsh with the former Taoiseach or Prime Minister of Ireland, Liam Cosgrave. He's well in his 90s in this picture. And he was the Prime Minister of Ireland when I first studied in Ireland in the 1970s. On the right, of course, you have a picture of, he was not the president at the time, and Marty Walsh was not his Secretary of Labor, but there's a picture of Joe Biden and his newest cabinet appointee, Marty Walsh of Boston. And the last slide that I have is a picture of a famine cottage, typical of what people like my grandparents came from in Califinish and Weenish in the far west of Ireland. This one happens to be in Rossmuck, where Marty Walsh's mother hailed from. We have a picture of Pierce's cottage. This would be the cottage of the famous signatory of the Easter 1916 rebellion, Patrick Pearse, who studied the Gaelic language out there. And the final picture on the right-hand side is a picture of Carna, which is very close to all of these places. My grandparents came from 2 miles one side of Carna and 2 miles the other side of Carna. And if you look carefully at that picture, you'll see a ruined building in the center right. Well, that was an old public building. The roof had caved in, but they resurrected that building, and it's all refurbished now as the Immigrants Commemorative Center. And I'm proud to say that Marty Walsh and I both serve as patrons of that center. I know that many of you are members of the Maine Irish Heritage Center, and you know of the work that they do here. I would urge any of you that have friends that are not yet members to get in touch with them, share this program and other programs that you'll find on the site, and see if they would be interested in joining in and being members. I hope all of you watching today enjoyed that program and learned something from it. Of course, many of you will have different opinions about the issues that were raised. And if any of you have any questions that you'd like to share on this program, don't hesitate to write to Maine Irish at maineirish.com. Thank you for your time today.